I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. Nearly 70% of patients with chronic conditions fail to take their medicines as prescribed. This can lead to poor outcomes and greater healthcare costs. Vivani Medical, which has developed implantable drug delivery technology, said it can provide steady drug release for up to 6 months with a single implant. This not only can address the problem of noncompliance, but can also reduce side effects associated with fluctuating drug release from conventional delivery methods. We spoke to Adam Mendelsohn, CEO of Vivani Medical, about its implantable drug delivery technology, how it works, and why its lead indication is a GLP-1 implant for weight loss and diabetes. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.
We're going to talk about Vivani's implantable drug delivery technology, the problem it's seeking to solve, and its pipeline strategy. Let's start with the issue of adherence and noncompliance with drug regimens for people with a chronic medical condition. How big a problem is this?
Well, let me start out by first mentioning that at Vivani, we are developing miniaturized, ultra-long-acting subdermal drug implants in order to address the large challenges of medication non-adherence and persistence for chronic disease treatments. And we aim to do this by making those treatments easier, more convenient, and potentially more tolerable. Now, let's deal first with your question about how large a problem the issue of adherence and noncompliance is. Well, it's kind of alarming for me, and I think staggering, to understand that about half of people with chronic diseases do not take their medicine as prescribed. And let me just dive a little bit further into the details of how we determine whether a patient is adherent with their medication. This is determined by whether they have sufficient drug in order to be able to take at least 80% of the days in which medication is prescribed. And think about this, only half of people end up filling their prescriptions in a sufficient quantity to be able to have and meet that 80% threshold. Now, this has really massive consequences. It has been estimated that medication non-adherence is responsible for approximately $500 billion in avoidable costs and 125,000 avoidable patient deaths per year in the United States. So we are highly motivated to do what we can to try to address this problem that, frankly, isn't being effectively addressed with any other options at the moment right now. And we're excited about the opportunity we have to hopefully do so.
Well, what's the consequence of this from a healthcare point of view? How does this impact outcomes and what is the economic cost to the healthcare system?
Well, if you can imagine that people are prescribed treatments because they have been demonstrated to be safe and effective in clinical trial settings, regulatory agencies have reviewed their data and demonstrated that so long as someone takes the medicine, they are going to receive the benefit. But when half of people don't take their medicine as prescribed, there is a large gap between the outcomes that are measured in a clinical trial setting and what actually occurs in the real world. In one study with GLP-1s, which is the target of our lead indications and our lead product, it has been shown that 75% of the difference in efficacy that has been demonstrated in clinical trials and the real world can be specifically attributed to medication non-adherence. So this is really a big problem from real world health outcomes perspectives. You next asked about the economic cost to the systems. I referenced in my earlier answer approximately $500 billion in avoidable costs. You can imagine that people who don't take their medicine end up going to the hospital or having additional doctor's visits that would not have been required if they had received the health benefits that these medicines have demonstrated to be able to provide. So there really is a large opportunity, and in our view, one of the biggest opportunities to really move the needle in the real world for patients, because these medicines that the industry has developed are remarkable. We just need to make sure that their potential can be fully realized in the real world. And we believe that our implantable technology may be able to provide a significant improvement in that regard.
We talk about the economic impact to the healthcare system, but at the same time, I imagine there is an economic cost to drug makers. Is there any sense of how this translates into lost sales?
Well, as you can imagine, with medication adherence rates being only about 50%, and as I mentioned earlier, how adherence is determined is whether someone has the medication that they need to be able to cover the days over which the medicine is prescribed. So what happens is people don't fill their prescriptions for a variety of reasons, and by not filling their prescriptions, the drug companies do not realize the income that they would have realized otherwise. So a quick look at some of the studies that have explored what the impact is consistent with about a 50% difference in potential revenues, which applies to and is consistent with the 50% adherence. There are some nuanced differences based on whether non-adherent patients are paying the same as the general population, but overall it's a very large impact. And not only do we think we can improve the health outcomes for patients, but also potentially the revenues for drug companies and make it more cost effective for payers. We think all stakeholders should be aligned in encouraging options that may facilitate improvement in medication adherence and persistence.
Vivani has developed what it calls its nanoport devices. As you mentioned, this is implantable technology that enables the delivery of a drug over an extended period of time. Can you describe these devices? How big are they? How are they implanted, and how do they work?
So nanoportal is the term we use to describe the drug delivery technology that powers our subdermal implants. The product that incorporates the technology it can range in size from, as an example, a large grain of rice to a short matchstick. The size of the product that we will be initiating our first clinical studies with later this year is approximately 2 millimeters in diameter and 22.5 millimeters in length. The diameter is very comparable to subdermal implants that are already on the market for treating contraception use, as an example. Very well accepted with very few complications. But the product is powered based on this technology that is essentially a material that is attached at one end of a titanium reservoir, through which medicine that is in a high concentration formulation inside the reservoir must pass through in order to become available. And the material consists of millions of titanium oxide nanotubes, whose inner diameter is the only path for the drug molecules to leave the reservoir. And if you were just to imagine that these nanotubes, that the opening was the size of a golf ball, the length of each nanotube would be about 10 stories tall. So there is a very long, narrow path that the drug must travel in order to become available. And what we can do with the technology is we can control the size of these nanotubes to be close enough in size to an individual drug molecule, such that the interactions that the drug has with the walls of the nanotube dominate the overall transport kinetics. And what happens is, above a certain concentration in the reservoir, the overall rate of release stays substantially constant. Now, the beauty of this is that we achieve this substantially constant release without any moving parts and with materials that have been extensively used in other long-term medical implants, titanium and titanium oxide, which enables the product to achieve a very minimally fluctuating delivery profile, which we think may have some benefits for a variety of molecules, but specifically in the GLP-1 class, where fluctuations, particularly when a rate of release increases quickly, can be responsible for the gastrointestinal side effects that represent the largest complaint of the GLP-1 therapies today. So the implantation procedure we anticipate being very similar to that which is used for the contraception implants that are on the market. The patient gets a little local anesthetic. The implant is preloaded into a tool that we call an applicator, which contains a needle that has the implant. The needle creates a pocket under the skin in the upper arm. The needle is retracted while a feature keeps the implant held in place. And once the needle is fully retracted into the tool, the applicator can be removed from the skin and a bandage placed over the site of insertion. So for patients, this is very easy. They show up to their doctor's appointment, and in between appointments, they don't have to think about taking their medicine. And we're excited about what this may be able to do for people.
Is there any constraint on the type of drug you can deliver through these? Can you deliver a biologic?
Yeah, so we've shown in the lab that the technology can provide sustained delivery of a wide range of molecules, from small molecules to peptides. We've shown with antibody fragments and full antibodies that we can achieve sustained release. And so we do anticipate ultimately broadly applying the technology across a wide range of molecule types. But what we have primarily demonstrated the technology with our peptides, exenatide being our lead program, semaglutide being another program in our pipeline, and we are exploring other peptides right now. So we think maybe it could be applied to biologics, but most of our demonstration has been in the peptide area.
And how long a period can these devices effectively deliver drug?
Well, we've shown in animals the ability to achieve what we anticipate will be therapeutic plasma levels once used in humans over a 6-month duration with our lead exenatide program. And we have shown in some preliminary studies in vitro the potential for our semaglutide program, NPM 139, to last up to a year, which is our goal is to really extend the duration as much as possible. The device constituent is very stable. We're talking titanium and titanium oxide, and really a very long period of time. However, because the materials of construction are metal, they do not dissolve, and once the product has completed its delivery, we expect it to be indicated for removal, but hopefully for replacement with a new implant as part of the same procedure.
And how much control do you have over the rate of delivery? And it seems like you suggested earlier that this could provide a far more stable and consistent delivery of a drug.
Yeah, so the control over the rate of delivery is defined based on the design of the membrane, the material that's used to control the release rate. And once designed and manufactured, the delivery rate and the profile are pretty much set in stone. And we can modify the design of the membrane either by changing the number of nanotubes that are accessible from the reservoir to outside the device to increase or decrease the rate of delivery. We can also tune the size of each of the nanotubes in order to accommodate different molecule sizes as we build out the platform and apply the technology across different molecules. So all of that can be tuned. And yes, as you pointed out, because there are no moving parts and because our technology enables the use of a relatively non-viscous and uniform formulation, we do see a very minimally fluctuating profile that we anticipate could provide benefit over drugs for which fluctuations could be problematic. And in the case of GLP-1s, it's not just people who are adherent to their medication that every, let's say, week when they have a weekly injection, the concentration of the drug will go up, after the injection each time. Uh, but maybe even more particularly for those patients that are not adherent, which is a large number, if they miss a dose or two or three, and then they take a subsequent dose, then the rise in plasma exposure that patient experiences can be pretty extreme and we believe accompanied by some of the tolerability issues. So with an implant, on the one hand, even against patients who are adherent, the steady exposure levels we think could be beneficial, but also avoiding the tolerability issues that we think could be associated with, let's call them marginally adherent patients and certainly non-adherent patients. We think there could be a very profoundly positive impact.
The company's preparing to move into the clinic, but what's known about the safety and efficacy of the devices from the work that's been done to date?
Well, I can first say that we're very happy that the FDA has cleared an IND for our exenatide implant a couple of months ago. And that milestone happened after we had conducted an extensive work demonstrating the safety of the implant and the materials that are used to construct the implant. We've put this into hundreds of animals without any product-related safety issues. We've conducted a many months long toxicology study without any concerning findings. We've characterized the leachables and extractables of the device constituent without any concerning findings. And we feel good about what the device and the drug device combination will be able to do on the safety side. And on the efficacy side, because initially we're looking at weight effects in obese and overweight patients. We've measured weight changes in all of the animal studies that we have conducted. And in one example where we controlled with a vehicle implant group, we saw sustained and persistent weight loss exceeding 20% over the 16-week duration over which that trial was conducted from a single administration. And more recently, earlier this year, we announced some data in which we placed our implants into an obese mouse model in which we controlled the exenatide implant group with both a sham implant group as well as with semaglutide injections. And what we saw over the 28-day period over which we controlled with the semaglutide injections, about a 20% weight loss compared to the sham implant control for both the exenatide implant and the semaglutide injections, with no difference between the exenatide implant and the semaglutide injection. So we feel pretty good about the potential efficacy, which we look forward to evaluating in the clinic.
And what's the pipeline strategy? Is the idea here to build a pipeline of novel therapies? Are you looking to take therapies that are now off patent and provide a new delivery mechanism? Or is it to partner with companies looking for a novel approach to something that might be in development?
Well, I'd say it's all of the above. We've started out by taking drugs that are off patent, like exenatides, and developing formulations of that drug that work with our device. And in the case of exenatide, being ready to initiate a clinical study. But we have also earlier this year announced that we have a semaglutide product in our pipeline. Both exenatide and semaglutide are GLP-1 monotherapies, but the advantage of semaglutide is both its association with products that have very blockbuster sales as well as its potential, we believe, for once yearly administration instead of twice yearly administration for exenatide. But we are exploring right now how we might apply the technology to some of the newer mechanisms of action that have been shown to be effective in weight management, weight loss, and related indications, such as GIP, glucagon, amylin. So these are all very early stage, but we are looking at how we can do that, and whether that's by looking at novel therapies or in discussions with partners with molecules that they have in development that have the right characteristics. All of the above are in play right now. And I guess I should mention that although we see so much opportunity right now in the GLP-1 field based on how big of a problem adherence and persistence is for those patients and the skyrocketing market numbers that we see, this is a platform delivery technology. And as we have additional capacity, as we continue to grow as a company, we will be looking for opportunities to either in partnership or by looking at off-patent drugs, expand our pipeline across other disease areas as well.
And what would make a particularly good indication for this technology? What's the thinking as you work to build a pipeline?
That's a great question. I'll talk about the indication first. We want to look for indications for which we think our type of delivery technology will be accepted and adopted by the relevant stakeholders associated with that indication. And so where adherence is going to be a problem, where sustained levels of drug are going to be beneficial. There are some cases where you want to have fluctuations, in which case our technology would not be well suited, and where it's chronic, where long-term care is going to be needed. And as far as the drug, there's a couple of main considerations. One, we need to make sure that we can fit enough drug into an implant that won't be too large for patients to accept. And this can be accomplished through a combination of either making sure that the drug has sufficient potency and solubility, so that high enough concentrations of medicine and low enough daily doses can provide the intended care. And where those two match is where we have ideal applications. And the GLP-1 class happens to be a perfect match for all of these considerations. But there are others, and we will continue to look for additional ones as we proceed.
And in terms of your partnering strategy, how do you think about that?
Well, we have developed the capability of manufacturing our materials and our product for early stage trials and also conducting early clinical studies. We do not currently have commercial capability. And so as we think about partnerships, we'd be looking for companies that would ultimately be able to help us in that regard, and also potentially with later phase clinical studies. And that's kind of in general, but specifically for the GLP-1 applications of our technology. There are a couple of, Novo and Lilly are the two large companies in the space, but there are many other companies that are looking to get into the GLP-1 space, and we believe that our, long-term implants, which can provide long-acting treatment and may improve tolerability, could be attractive ways for some of these other partners to get into the space. We are setting ourselves up to be able to generate hopefully positive clinical data ourselves, and we are obviously looking into and talking with some of the pharma companies that are in the space as well, and we'll see where those conversations go.
You had mentioned your experimental version of exenatide. This is NPM 115. It's a 6-month GLP-1 implant under development for chronic weight management and obesity. This has been exenatide has been marketed as Byetta. It's off patent. How does it compare to newer GLP-1 drugs?
So exenatide is a GLP-1 monotherapy, meaning that it only acts on the GLP-1 receptor. And but it also, in its native form, has a very short half-life. So it's about 2.4 to 4 hours. And as a result, Byetta, which is the first product incorporating exenatide to receive an approval, actually the first GLP-1 agonist to receive a marketing approval, required twice daily injection in order to accommodate the very short half-life. There is a newer version of an exenatide product called Bidurian, which enables once weekly injection, but that product can be, at least in its initial forms, complicated to administer and with a relatively large needle gauge. Where we've seen the strong uptick in sales of GLP-1 products, it initially started with a drug called Trulicity, which is also a GLP-1 monotherapy that was easy to use and then eventually started to generate some very positive clinical data. And then more recently with Ozempic, which is semaglutide GLP-1 monotherapy for type 2 diabetes, and now Wegovy, which is semaglutide for chronic weight management. And then in addition, there has been further development beyond GLP-1 monotherapy with drugs like tirzepatide, which is the active ingredient in Mounjaro, which is tirzepatide for type 2 diabetes, and Zepbound, which is tirzepatide for chronic weight management. Our preclinical data, which we announced earlier this year, and our view of the inherent potential for exenatide is that it is no different from the potential for that semaglutide has been able to realize as far as its efficacy, but that the products incorporating exenatide have been held back because of trying to account for the short half-life of the drug. Now, our technology, which continuously replenishes exenatide into the bloodstream, enables, we believe, for exenatide to realize its full potential, because a short half-life isn't so relevant when the drug is constantly being replaced by the device. So we anticipate, just like our weight loss study demonstrated earlier this year, that an exenatide implant should be able to produce comparable data as Ozempic and Wegovy have been able to produce. But the reason I mentioned earlier that we are exploring how we might apply our technology to even newer molecules is because when you take a look at the data that tirzepatide, the drug in Mounjaro and Zepbound, has produced, it does appear that there is an additional benefit when you act not just on GLP-1 receptors, but other receptors, other drugs in development that target also the glucagon receptor and the amylin receptor are showing really incredible promise. And so while we will continue to believe that a 6-month dosage form that is easy and convenient and potentially more tolerable for a GLP-1 monotherapy will have a place in the market, even in the context of weekly or even potentially monthly injectables of some of the newer molecules. Down the road, we are going to work to apply our technology to the latest and greatest molecules to stay as competitive as we can be.
Your current pipeline followed a reprioritization. Can you explain what changes you made and why?
Yeah, we started out applying our technology to exenatide long before GLP-1s became so hot for weight loss and obesity management. And all of the GLP-1s that are approved right now were initially approved for treating patients with type 2 diabetes. What the industry has learned is that when evaluated at higher doses, there is a greater effect on weight, and this is what has been leveraged with the higher dose versions of the products that have been available recently. So when we submitted our IND to the FDA, we were discussing a clinical study in which we would study the product in patients with type 2 diabetes, and that had been our focus. But earlier this year, when we produced and then announced the weight loss data demonstrating the potential for our exenatide implant to produce comparable weight loss as semaglutide injections, we decided to change the strategic focus of our company from type 2 diabetes to obesity treatment and chronic weight management. Not because we intend to abandon type 2 diabetes, but it's just what is the first in human study going to be and what is our priority going to be. So we have labeled the clinical program associated with evaluating our exenatide implant for chronic weight management as NPM 115, and we changed the design of our initial clinical study from patients with type 2 diabetes to patients who are obese or overweight.
How far will existing funding take you, and what's the plan for raising additional capital?
We have existing cash that lasts us well into the second half of 2025, and we do not have any debt. With the clinical study fast approaching, we feel pretty good about our runway at the moment, but we will be looking for opportunities as we initiate the study, begin enrolling patients, and look for some hopefully positive data to be able to extend our runway through capital raises and or the possibility of strategic deals as we continue our discussions with partners.
When new drug delivery technologies are introduced, the physician and patient response can be quite different than what a drug developer expected. I think of the big flop of inhaled insulin. What's known about how doctors and patients might view your technology?
Oh, it's a great question. Obviously, looking at the graveyard of failed products enables us to learn lessons and hopefully not repeat the mistakes that have been made. Thinking specifically about inhaled insulin, there were a number of reasons why those products did not succeed in the way that people had expected. But what makes us confident about the success of our implants is when we first look at some of the patient and physician survey data that has been generated in combination with a 6-month exenatide implant, and I'll tell you some of that now. Last year, 56% of patients who participated in the survey and who were already on a GLP-1 indicated that they would either definitely or likely get and use a 6-month exenatide implant if it were approved by the FDA, covered by insurance, and recommended by their physician. And we conducted some physician research in which we inquired primarily with primary care physicians, which is where most of patients with type 2 diabetes and obesity receive their care, how likely they would be to recommend a long-term exenatide implant to their patients. And on a scale of 1 to 10, they rated it an 8.3. And it was very clear, this was a qualitative market research study that we conducted, that these physicians, and this was in connection with the diabetes application, to be clear, but these physicians were already of the belief that those of their patients that were prescribed treatment but were not getting the effect that the physician would have expected from the treatment, the physicians believed that that was likely due to non-adherence. And this is consistent with the population-wide data that exists. But in addition to the specific survey results, when we look at the history of products that have improved on the frequency of administration and the ease of use, there's a consistent pattern of very strong adoption following those changes. Whereas when we look at, as an example with inhaled insulin, changing the route of administration, there's a more of a checkered response as far as whether that translates to improved adoption or not. So we believe that we are addressing the right challenges that physicians, patients, and even payers who stand to benefit from having what we believe could be a more cost-effective solution as a result of people getting the benefits of the medication, can all rally around. And we look forward to generating more data, but also being mindful of expectations not having been met with prior technology development efforts, but not being deterred because for all the reasons I've just stated, we remain confident that our product meets a very clear and pressing need.
Adam Mendelsohn, CEO of Vivani Medical. Adam, Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Vivani Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.